Welcome to Left, Right and Centre. I'm Vishnu Shom. I'm joined by my colleague Maria Shakil. On the show, Prime Minister Modi on his way to the United States for a historic visit, marking his first trip since Donald Trump's re-election as the 47th president. The Prime Minister was in France for a crucial AI summit, in addition to key bilateral engagements with the French leadership.
In the United States, the two leaders are set to discuss strengthening India-US ties, with a focus on trade, defense and regional security. Mr. Modi's visit comes at a pivotal time as both nations navigate global challenges, including the issue of tariffs and deportation of Indian nationals. Expect some high-stakes talks, vibrant cultural exchanges and a potential boost to the strategic partnership.
Well, we're also joined by Nikunj Garg, who's covering every aspect of this visit from Washington. Nikunj.
Well, yes, Vishnu, I think Maria put it very aptly when she said that expect some high-stakes conversations there. High stakes because my sense is that the usual has already been achieved in this relationship. Whatever had to be the mundanities of a diplomatic talk and the mundanities of a diplomatic relationship between the two high-powered, highly placed, one the strongest and one the biggest democracy of the world has already been achieved. Now you have to take it to the next level, and to discuss all of that, I will be joined by a very distinguished panel in a short while from now. For now, back to you, Maria and Vishnu.
Well, a quick look at the headlines. The Prime Minister has wrapped up his three-day France visit. The Prime Minister inaugurated a new consulate in Marseille on the final day of his visit. He flies now to the United States. He arrives in a few hours.
The Supreme Court, in fact, has questioned freebies that have been given after poll promises by political parties. Says too much free gifts are making people unwilling to work. The Apex Court made these observations while hearing a public interest litigation.
The Madras High Court vacates a stay on the Election Commission. Their proceedings in the AIA-DMK two-leaf symbol dispute between various factions. It's a setback to Edapadi Palaniswamy, who is facing a challenge to his leadership from different factions. And
trouble seems to be growing for YouTuber Ranveer Allahabadia. He, along with others, are called for questioning. They have been charged with degrading Indian culture, family system, and hurting religious sentiments.
And the Adani Group's new big initiative, Skill and Employment Partnerships, a world-class finishing school at Mundra. When we look at the strategic partnership between India and the United States, it's important perhaps to take a look at what exactly is this all premised on. So let's bring you a list of major defense deals between India and the United States along with their approximate value. Now, this is one of the most recent ones. This is for MH-60R Seahawk helicopters for the Indian Navy. This is a deal worth about $2.6 billion. The significance is that it enhances India's naval capabilities. Another big deal is for MQ-9B high-altitude, long-endurance drones. Let's change that image and go to the next one, please. 31 drones, the ones that you see on your screen, for the Indian Armed Forces. The approximate value, about $3.3 billion. The significance is that it boosts India's intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance capabilities. India and the US are looking at an engine deal, the General Electric F414 jet engine co-production deal. It's joint production with Hindustan Aeronautics. The initial amount of money put in, $1 billion. The significance is that it's meant to power the Tejas Mark II jets of the Indian Air Force. The C-17 Globemaster III transport, 11 C-17s are in service with the Indian Armed Forces, the Indian Air Force. More than $4 billion was what the deal was worth. The significance, this bedrocks India's strategic lift capabilities. The AH-64 Apache attack helicopters, 22, in service with the Indian Air Force in a $2.1 billion deal. The Army's also acquiring a few. The significance, ground support and anti-tank operations. The P-8 Poseidon maritime reconnaissance aircraft, 12 in service with the Indian Navy, approximately $3.5 billion. The significance, reconnaissance and anti-submarine warfare. Howitzers, the M777 for the Indian Army, 145 of these guns in service. The approximate value, $73 million. The significance, it's lightweight, it's mobile, it works in the mountains very well. Even basic equipment, the 6-hour assault rifles, 72,400 of these guns now entering service with the Indian Army, basic infantry weapon in a $90 million deal. This is part of modernization of the Indian Armed Forces. Harpoon anti-ship missiles and torpedoes for the for the Navy primarily. The value, $155 million. It enhances our naval strike capability. And finally, the Hercules tactical airlifter. 12 of these are in service, approximately $2 billion. The total deal value, we acquired them in 2009 and in 2012. It's for Special Forces operations, and it is also for disaster relief. Well, India is designated as a major defense partner of the United States. This means that we have access to some of the most sensitive and cutting-edge technology that America possesses. But in order to get to this status, both countries spent upwards of a decade negotiating and then signing what are called foundational agreements. If you're talking about India and the United States and the strategic partnership, we cannot do this without understanding the bedrock of the relationship. First up, the General Security of Military Information Agreement that was signed in 2012. It facilitates the sharing of military intelligence between India and the US that enhances strategic cooperation and trust. In 2016-2017, India was declared a major defense partner. This was in fact the framework created to build on the strategic relationship, to give India access to cutting-edge American technology. But then India had to sign what was called, or what is called, the Logistics Exchange Memorandum of Agreement, LEMOA, signed in 2016. It allows mutual access to designated military facilities for refueling and replenishment, boosting operational coordination. So this was an American warship which was in fact serviced at Larsen and Toubro in Kattupalli in the shipyards in Tamil Nadu. So that enabled American vessels to come into Indian facilities. So refueling, replenishment, if India deploys our warships anywhere in the world, we need those fuel to be refueled, to be replenished. We just go into American bases and, it's part of that agreement. So that boosts operational coordination specifically for naval forces in the Indo-Pacific. Then there was something called COMCASA, which stands for Communications Compatibility and Security Agreement. It was signed in 2018. It enables secure communications and access to advanced US defense systems. That improves interoperability between the armed forces. Let me explain. What you see are the P-8 Poseidon aircraft of the Indian Navy. These are manufactured by Boeing. These are anti-submarine warfare aircraft, maritime reconnaissance aircraft. These can actually operate seamlessly with American P-8s as well. And the data collected by one can electronically be transferred on a real-time basis to American sensors, whether it's warships or other aircraft or drones in the area. So the tech between the systems needs to talk and it has to be secure. That's what that agreement actually ensures. There's also the Basic Exchange and Cooperation Agreement signed in 2020. It provides India with real-time access to US geospatial intelligence, enhancing the accuracy of missile systems and situational awareness for defense operations.
Of course, defense cooperation has emerged as one of the key instruments of India-US strategic partnership. I'm going to go straight across to Nikunj Garg, who's joining us from Washington, D.C. Nikunj, over to you. Continue with the conversation.
Thanks, Maria. And I am joined by a very distinguished panel of guests out here in a very snowed-out American capital. Kirti from Industech, Mr. Mark Linscott from USISPF and the Asia Group, Sanjeev Joshpura from the Diaspora, and my first comments to our newly joining guest, Mr. Mark Linscott. Please tell me something. Everyone says that the defense and the strategic partnership is the cornerstone or the bedrock, as to say, of this relationship. My own thoughts are slightly different from that, and I believe that the kind of tech that this capital can transfer or actually can marshal to be transferred to Indian shores, and technology is something that we need. We need for upgrading, for the betterment of the life of a very large swath of our population. No other capital can. Would you agree with me, or would you say that it still remains, the defense still remains the centerpiece of this relationship? What would be your thoughts on that?
Well, I lean in your direction as well. I think certainly the broad-based tech sector is the future of the bilateral relationship, and I specifically work on trade, the bilateral trade relationship. So every sector, whether it's goods, agriculture, services, digital services, but I think the tech area is where we're going to see the growth and where the two sides need to work together.
Kriti, again, the same question to you. Technology is something that we need for the betterment of humanity back home. Mr. Modi prides himself in the fact, his administration, that they have pulled out nearly 25 crore people in last 1 decade out of abject poverty, and that's the new middle class that India now has. Would you also think that the technological prowess of Washington, D.C. is something that we need? And we can actually partner the Americans on that front. It's not just a one-way street.
No, absolutely. You know, you look at most of the platforms that are there, they are powered by engineers that are in India. We've had this great relationship, a symbiotic relationship where US has the innovation, India provides the scale. Or even if you go to Silicon Valley, and I think Sanjeev would be more able to talk about the Diaspora over there and the great work they're doing. Most of the companies right now, they have CEOs or so on that have certain sort of Indian origin over there. And I think in trade also, technology trade, services trade, digital trade is really the bedrock of our bilateral trade. And then since we're talking about trade, I also want to mention that I think there's been a lot of talk on tariffs and how the trade relation is going to turn out under this Trump administration. But I think there's an underappreciated fact. The fact that, when we look back to the first Trump administration, for the first time, we came so close to actually inking a sort of US-India mini trade deal or trade deal. So that
by whatever name you give it, many people. I was talking to a diplomat yesterday, and I said, would it be a sort of a FTA? And he said, what's in a name? A nomenclature can be anything, but if you can elevate it to a level where the trade of goods and commodities, and in our case services also, flows freely, then that's where we wish to arrive at.
Well, absolutely. In fact, I was the first U.S. negotiator on that mini deal during the first Trump administration related to India's benefits under the Generalized System of Preferences program. And it was going to cover a lot of sectors, but not nearly as much as a free trade agreement, whatever you want to call it. I do think that this time around, and we may see that announcement with the Prime Minister's visit, the two sides will commit to a very substantial trade agreement negotiation, and they will have an ambitious timetable, perhaps by the end of the year. And it will cover goods, it will cover all good sectors, it will cover services, it will cover, I expect, intellectual property rights. It will be wide-ranging. So I'm a real optimist. I see the potential as being huge.
My sense is that probably even the hardcore proponents of some kind of caveating this relationship would not be pessimists, I would say, currently in the state that we are in. But let me ask you a different question, Sanjeev. Let me ask you a question about the Diaspora's interests. And Prime Minister has always been a very big champion of the Indian diasporas across the globe. It's not just United States of America, but across the globe. He has interacted freely with them. He has taken the Pravasi Bharatiya Divas and the awards associated with it to the next level. His engagements are, of course, are far more vigorously powered with the diasporas. And you represent diaspora and diasporic interests in the United States of America. What do you think is top of the line agenda when it comes to diaspora, other than, of course, as the relationships grow, become more powerful, become more engaging, become more vigorous, diasporas obviously benefit?
You're absolutely right, Nikunj. At Diaspora, we represent global diaspora leadership and their connections with leaders in India. So we've seen this engagement by Prime Minister Modi, which is vigorous in a lot of different countries, as you alluded to. Here in the United States during his current visit, it's important to note that we released a report, in Diaspora did, in conjunction with the Boston Consulting Group last year, talking about the US-India, the Indian diaspora in the US, and their positive impacts on a broad swath of US society and on the US-India corridor. So go beyond the CEOs, go beyond the tech firms. There are 16 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies that are of Indian origin. There are 78 unicorns in America that are founded by Indian origin folks. But go beyond that. There are 6,000 hotels in America. There are 22,000 Indian origin professors in America. So it goes to various facets of the relationship. You look at hotels, restaurants, all of those kinds of things. It goes into so many facets that it's a very broad-based economic driver of the relationship beyond the cultural benefits that the diaspora relationship brings.
Mark, of course, the size of the two economies, since you have a very wide-ranging experience in the trade world as well, the size of the two economies is quite different, you know. Few trillions on our side, a massive American economy on the other side. But this relationship has actually benefited from a two-way street kind of a transaction. This is not a one-way street relationship where India has always taken a backseat as a recipient of the aid or as a recipient only. India has obviously created, you know, as Sanjeev was very valiantly mentioning, you know, created a great deal of wealth in the United States of America, particularly the talent pool, a large talent pool, which is also a national wealth, so to say. So do you think that the time has now come that whether it is under the construct of a free trade agreement or whether it is under any other construct, a more liberal regime can be put in place between India and the United States of America so as to ensure that this flow of services and goods is virtually free. And also, another point that I would wish you to speak on and about is the fact that the whole gamut of this relationship, if it moves out of certain silos like the defense or the technology now being the AI world, and gets into a more diverse and larger plane of free trades, goods, services, etc. Do you think it's more and much beneficial to the populations on both sides, the civilian, large, complete populations on both sides?
Absolutely. And in terms of liberalization, there was a time, certainly early in my career, in which it was negotiations in Geneva, the World Trade Organization, and equal treatment for all. We are well beyond those days. We now have a world in which countries negotiate individually with each other, bilaterally, sometimes regionally, and that's the future. That's the trend in terms of liberalizing trade. And I think we'll have that situation with the Trump administration. He's threatened tariffs. He likely will increase tariffs, but that just gets the two sides, U.S. and India, to the table, to the negotiating table, to actually get to a point where they are offering benefits to each side. It will be beneficial for both sides. And you compare the size of the economies, but I think the bigger picture is that India will soon be the third largest economy in the world. So what is being negotiated for the years ahead is between the largest economy in the world and soon to be the third largest economy. And as Sanjeev pointed out, this is more than about goods crossing borders, services crossing borders. This is about individuals. This is about the peoples of both countries and how they can benefit from this trade relationship.
And I've always maintained that people remain the cornerstone of any relationship. Tech, trade, transfers, goods, free services, all of them come later. My last words, the last words of the discussion to the lady, a brief comment, and then I have to hand it back over to the studios.
Well, I think we'll keep the upward trajectory of the relationship, build on the foundations that Trump in his first administration laid down and Biden sort of continued, be it with ISET, in this X, or even, I'm pretty hopeful on the trade deal as well, especially since India itself has extended a hand by reviewing a lot of the tariffs and custom duties. So I think it's going to be a good ride for the next 4 years.
And my sense, both Maria and Vishnu, after talking to a whole host of people here, people who are closely working with the US administration, is that everyone believes that when you start early, as I was discussing with Sanjeev in my last conversation with him, early bird catches the worm. So when you start early, Prime Minister is here just under a month of the inauguration of the American president, and you have now full 4 years to go. And each of the steps that you need to take, remember, patience is a virtue when it comes to diplomatic ties. Nothing papers over the differences as much as probably patience, hard work, backroom negotiations, and painstaking step-by-step march forward.
Sure.
And all of that, you need time in hand. Time in hand is the biggest possible asset that relationships can have with a mutual agreement at the apex of political leadership.
All right. Okay,
India
Nikunj, I'm just going to interrupt you now because we've got Ambassador Nirupama Rao waiting for us, the former Foreign Secretary of India. Ma'am, thank you very much for being with us. As we look ahead to the visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, there are a couple of areas which might actually be thorny, difficult. For example, the issue of Russian oil imports. Is that something you expect President Trump to bring up?
Well, thank you, Vishnu, for having me on the show. First and foremost, before I answer your question, I think it's important for both our media friends and our viewers to set the visit of Prime Minister Modi to Washington so soon after Donald Trump has begun his second presidency in proper context. And I think many of the previous individuals who appeared on your show did allude to this. I think it's necessary that we should understand the geopolitical matrix of this relationship and the strategic, comprehensive, and global nature of it. It's a dialogue of democracies, as was mentioned, and you have a 5.5 million strong Indian American diaspora that are passionate advocates of this relationship. So we are in a good place. We have the year of President Trump. It's a robust relationship, and there is high-stake diplomacy involved in this, as Maria just noted. Of course, there'll be challenges arising from tariffs and trade and immigration, but let's also remember that the US and India need each other in a fragmented multipolar world, especially as the China challenge, and if I can use the word, the China challenge is the Godzilla in the Indo-Pacific. Now, to answer your specific question, I do not believe India can be forced or coerced to reduce its Russian oil imports. Our energy security is obviously important to us. But at the same time, we've never shied away from seeking a diversification of our oil imports. And we recently resumed imports from Venezuela, for instance. Our imports from the Middle East have increased by 4.3% over the previous year in 2024. And the share of this oil, Middle Eastern oil in our imports, is now 51.5%, and this amount may well increase. So I expect Russian supplies of oil to reduce following recent US sanctions. And of course, our sourcing strategy is very dynamic. When PM Modi met Vice President Vance in Paris yesterday, for instance, they discussed energy supplies and also the possibility of India diversifying its energy sourcing, including potential investments in American nuclear technology.
That's right. Ambassador, let's look at this visit. As you said, that it's important for our viewers to understand how critical this visit is. How much of importance will you give to the fact that he's in the fourth week of his second presidency, and if you look at the world leaders who have met Donald Trump, it includes Israel's Prime Minister, Japanese Prime Minister, and of course Jordanian King Abdullah, and now you have Prime Minister Modi. So in order, it is the fourth foreign high-profile visit which is happening to Washington, D.C.
Definitely. It is a good augury, I believe, for the growth and the progress and further development of India-US bilateral relations that Prime Minister Modi is visiting Washington so early in the Trump presidency. So, which is why I said, let us always keep in mind, let's not lose sight of the fact of the importance of this relationship and the matrix in which it is embedded today. There's more than just trade and tariffs and immigration to it.
But that said, ma'am, I understand the importance of the strategic relationship. You have been somebody who's built that strategic relationship, all of those foundational agreements, all of those differences which have been overcome. But at the same time, when you've got the United States putting out video of Indian deportees being taken away on a military transport with their hands and legs, or feet bound, it doesn't seem to be something which friends do to one another. I know what the American laws are, but do you not believe that this is something which could have been done differently by America? Why put them on military transports? Little babies, women, and others.
I, of course, see the fact that there is a sort of theater that surrounds the deportation of irregular or illegal migrants in the United States, and this plays to domestic audiences there, particularly the MAGA constituency, and that is definitely a problem. And we've all seen the consternation and the concern that has been expressed in India by those visuals of our migrants being returned home in shackles. And it would appear that their basic human rights have been adversely affected in that regard. So that concern and consternation that we express today in India is very natural, and I think it is more than possible. I am sure that Prime Minister Modi will raise this issue and talk about the need for more humane treatment of Indian migrants during his discussions with President Trump. He's expected to emphasize the importance of treating deportees with dignity and respect, reflecting the strong bilateral relationship between our two democracies.
The point that was made by Vishnu certainly was about more dignified deportation. Perhaps do you think that could come up? But ma'am, I'm going to move away from that and look at points of convergences that, perhaps the two sides will be looking at less tension and looking at what can give some kind of exuberance to this entire visit. Do you think defense, technology, all these are areas where there can be significant bilateral announcements in this visit?
Precisely, Maria, because, even as there's been so much of, the debate and discussion about the possible tariffs that President Trump may impose on Indian goods entering the United States, we've also heard, the enormous possibilities for increase in our energy imports from the United States, more defense equipment, more defense systems. Vishnu gave this wonderful, detailed exposition of the nature of our ties in that regard. And we are willing to explore all these possibilities very seriously in these areas because there is mutual interest from both sides in doing so. And there is obviously mutual benefit. So it makes for a win-win situation.
Ambassador, a final question to you. We keep talking about technology, defense, China, but the relationship, I would suggest, is bedrocked by people. Yes. Families who live in America, who've got relatives over here, students, lakhs of students, so very important for the American economy, for education of students going forward. And then we've got this very basic problem that getting a visa to go to America is a nightmare. You go back for a visa for a visa appointment years later. How do you believe that these human issues, right, which are at the heart of the relationship, must be resolved?
I completely agree with you that people are the beating heart of this relationship. And, given the nature of the visa process, of course, it is entirely the sovereign jurisdiction of the visa issuing country about the policies that. But one has to recall that it was during his first term that President Trump's administration implemented policies that led to increased scrutiny and longer processing times for visas. Not just India being targeted in this regard. So there are enhanced vetting procedures, stricter adjudication standards. So given this history, my hunch, I hope I'm wrong, it's unlikely that a second Trump administration would prioritize expediting the visa process for Indian applicants. In fact, I believe there's potential for further tightening of such immigration policies, which could result in additional delays. So Indian travelers, Indian students, Indian professionals seeking US visas should be prepared for possibly extended processing times. I hope that's not true, but given the lay of the land and given the mood and the kind of fever that has gripped the base in the United States on the issue of immigration and the entry of foreigners and outsiders, I'm afraid, we are looking at some turbulence there.
All right, Ambassador Nirupama Rao, really appreciate your time. We hope to connect with you tomorrow as well when the meetings would be happening in Washington, D.C. And joining us now on this broadcast are Adele, who is an investigative journalist. Ajay Jain is Deputy National Finance Chair, Democratic Party and Asian American Community Leader. We also have Dr. Tara Kartha, Dr. Bharat Barai joining us, and Professor Irfan from Georgetown University. Beginning with you, Mr. Jain, the concerns regarding tariff, are you expecting that to be raised by the Indian side? Or do you think the fact that despite Trump calling India tariff king or big abuser, he hasn't made a significant announcement vis-a-vis India? If we were to look at or make that comparison with other countries, 25% tariffs on goods from Mexico and Canada, an additional tariff of 10% on goods entering from China. But as far as India is concerned, no announcement per se has been made.
Absolutely. I mean, first of all, U.S.-India relationship, and it has been bipartisan relationship, is strong in several administrations. But this is a new beginning of a new phase for the relationship, where Trump 2.0 is going with America first. And as you said, he has been imposing tariffs, and he's trying to get as much as from the other countries to contribute to America. And I would not be surprised if he wants India to reduce tariffs on or giving market to Tesla or electric vehicle from US and many other products entry into India, and reducing their tariffs and custom duties, etc. At the same time, making there will be agreements between defense sector, where India is a big market for defense for US, and there will be a lot of new openings out there. And as an equal partner, India would be looking to the market in US and an alternative for China to become a manufacturing hub and moving the manufacturing to India, including semiconductor chips manufacturing. India will also be looking to, I'm sure he should bring up the issues related to H-1B visa, which is going to be a more difficult process for all the people in green card backlog over here. And birthright citizenship is something which is taking shape out here with constant deportation, and there will be thousands of people who have come here illegally from Indian origin. They will be facing deportation.
All right.
So just give me half a second so that I can just keep the strike rotating. I'm joined by Dr. Bharat Barai as well, chairperson of the US-India Community Foundation. I would argue the foremost member of the diaspora in the US, not only a fantastic doctor, but also somebody who's been looking to build the relationship between Indians and and Americans and the political establishment as well. When you came to America decades back, how were Indians looked upon, and how are Indians looked upon today in America? For example, one of the biggest areas in America where we've seen a change is the political involvement of Americans, of Indians,
yes,
or Americans of Indian origin across party lines. Do you believe that it's the presence of these Indians in the political system which is really shaping the way the relationship, the tides go?
Vishnu, when I came almost 50 years ago, there were very few Indians. The first batch was the nuclear engineers who came in the 60s. And then in late 60s and 70s, the physicians came, and then everybody else has followed. Clearly, we were intrigued upon. They thought that we are coming from a country that was the desh of Madaris, snake charmers. As the time has gone, as 10% of the US physicians are of Indian origin, it has changed. So many engineers, so many business people, so many educators. So now, 5 decades later, the Indians have been very actively involved in trying to promote the cause of India-US relationship. We are the voters, and we are also contributors. In USA, the finance of the congressmen and senators is open. So Indians having the highest income as far as the ethnic groups are concerned in USA have been opening up their checkbooks, openly talking with congressmen and senators. And as I point out, at the last Diwali celebration on Capitol Hill in 2024, there were almost 50 congressmen and senators who came for our Diwali function. So I think the Indian Americans have played a great part in trying to foster the relationship. The congressmen, senators, and the general public is realizing that these are very smart, very well-educated people who know how to express themselves and participate in the political arena.
Okay. Adele, Prime Minister Modi and Donald Trump have a great degree of bonhomie. I mean, this partnership between India and US is also very personality driven, because these two leaders have several common personality traits as well, which includes their shared perceptions of China. So are you expecting, as a journalist who watches strategic partnerships of nations, that there could be some movement on that front?
So I definitely think that the relationship shared by world leaders, conflicts of personalities, clashes, believe it or not, it's like a business transaction. You want to vibe with the person that you're going to be working with. And I think that's one of the reasons why Narendra Modi is very much respectful of President Donald Trump. Prime Minister Modi and Trump get along together because they do have that in common. They're able to approach things from a practical way. And I have to say that in addition to having, the geopolitical realignment that's happening, rebalancing of power, there is that added element of having the camaraderie and the mutual understandings, which is leading to a deepening of ties. And I think something that I had said during Trump's first term was that I think when looking at his predecessor, President Barack Obama, Narendra Modi had a really amicable relationship with President Barack Obama, on a, level where they got along, they did well together. When it came to the policies, however, I think that there was less of a synergy as opposed to looking at President Trump and what's currently happening. So in this case, they happen to do well not only on a personal level, they also are very much aligned, I think, in terms of geopolitical strategy. I have to say, I think that this tariff, the tariff implementation is not going to really be implemented against India. In fact, we see that trade has increased, and India is even importing LNG from the US, among other things. So ultimately, I do see an overall deeppening of ties across all sectors: economic, trade, defense.
So let's bring in Dr. Tara Karta in this conversation now. Dr. Tara Karta, what are your expectations from this visit? Because there are some immediate concerns or tensions vis-a-vis deportation and also of tariffs. But do you think there is also a great degree of mismatched expectations in this equation too?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Because, look, in the end, let's be realistic. Luckily, you're not among the top 10 of Trump's concentrated, his priorities. You're not really among the top 10. That's a good thing. But having said that, we sort of, we look to the US to get a great deal of our economy going. That for us is the most vital component. The defense and everything comes later. And that is where we are hoping, like, even if you say, for example, the backbone of the defense agreement is the Industry and Security Index. So there's a lot of things which Trump actually pushed through during his first term, including the Sea Guardians, etc. He used his personal muscle to push through those deals, which was the first non-NATO country to get that. It's a different issue. We never got them. So there are breakthroughs which have happened, which shows despite not being among the top 10 in US concerns, you do have a place there as not an ally, but a very important, important player in what the US wants to do in the Indo-Pacific. That's the end. I mean, that's what Project 2025 was all about. It was talking about India as a kind of part.
All right, Dr. Karta, half a second. I wanted to go across to Professor Irfan Nuruddin. Professor Nuruddin, is this relationship, the strategic part of it, bedrocked on the common concerns India and America have on China?
That's a bedrock of the relationship. That's what brings the two countries together, the geopolitical level, they share a concern about China. They share it differently, obviously. The United States worries about China as the premier strategic threat to American supremacy globally. India's concerns are much more local, and we share borders that are conflicted with China. But India's economy is quite dependent on the Chinese economy, much as the American economy is as well. And in the long run, China is as a middle-income country of 1.4 billion people. It'll be silly for India to ignore Indian businesses to ignore China as a huge market in the 21st century. So we have different underlying, wants and needs from the China relationship, but what the United States and India share is that China is impossible to ignore, and to the extent that that has pulled the two countries together, that is absolutely unavoidable.
Okay, let's go back to Dr. Bharat Barai. Dr. Bharat Barai, given the kind of participation that Indians, or should I say Indian Americans have in the present administration, right from Kash Patel to also, the spouse of the vice president, that element of the human touch that we keep talking about, particularly with regards to how the Indian illegal migrants were treated, do you think that can be addressed at perhaps at a different level too?
Well, we are very proud that so many Indian Americans who are leading personalities in USA have been included into the Trump administration. I'm sure on the private level, they will be making their voices known to the Trump administration about the treatment of Indian Americans. It's a two-way thing about the deportees. On one side, we agree that they should be treated in more humane manner. Handcuffing the males and taking them, chaining them is not a good idea. On their side, they are representing that when the plane is 35,000 above, and if these people create any trouble because they are deportees, that can challenge the safety of the aircraft, the personnel and the aircraft. So they are handcuffing them so that they don't create any major disturbance and crash of the aircraft. So I think the in-between solution is, if India was to send its own aircraft, either military or civilian, and transport them, then they will be able to put them into the aircraft and let the owners of the aircraft manage it. That will probably be the best way to try to handle this situation. And by the way, Tulsi Gabbard is likely to be approved by the Senate today as an intelligence director.
Okay, so that's going to be a huge development.
Let me just go back to Adele. What are some of the areas of potential concern between India and the United States? There are, for example, differences on Russian oil, there are differences on Iran. Do you believe that any of this might actually come up?
So I just want to address quickly before I do the issue of the way the illegal immigrants were treated in India. Sorry, back to India. I think what President Trump was trying to do when handling that was to show that he's really applying an equal law to everyone, regardless of the fact that India is a true partner, unofficial ally, right, of the United States. So I definitely want to just clarify that. And I think that, the same would have been done with the U.S. It's unfortunate in any situation to have deportations occur, but I think President Trump is just trying to show that he's applying the law of the land equally to everyone involved. Regarding your question that you asked me, I do think some issues will come up for sure. Trade and tariffs, of course, is on everyone's tongues. It's definitely, India has, of course, expressed frustration over the U.S. protectionist policies, right? And the withdrawal of its, I think it's a general system of preference benefits, which allow tariff-free exports of Indian goods. I happen to think, though, that this isn't going to be as big of an issue as perhaps Prime Minister Narendra Modi initially thought. There's definitely going to be talks about defense and military technology transfer. India is obviously increasing its defense cooperation with the U.S. That said, it still relies heavily on Russian military equipment. And the U.S. has discouraged this. Although I do think that with the release of an American from the Russian prison, I think it was yesterday, I feel like the ice between the U.S. and Russia is kind of melting. So it could be a win for all in that said. And also, go ahead.
We have just enough time for Dr. Kartha. Dr. Kartha, Prime Minister Modi had a successful, stay in France. India was the co-host of the AI summit, and now he is in Washington, D.C., arriving in the next few hours. It's a brief visit, but one which is strategically important. And the fact that India co-hosted an important AI futuristic summit of that nature, do you think India's presence on the high table, the high world table, actually is being reinforced repeatedly?
Yeah, I think in Paris, apart from the AI, the main message was both countries believed in strategic autonomy. And that's a word which annoys academics in the US. It's also viewed unofficially, not liking that too much, the kind of strategic autonomy, which is really now the basis of what our foreign policy is. And the number two, which I'd really like to point out, is you just signed a major defense deal with France. And someone's going to ask in Washington, hey, how about what are you going to sign with us? So I would expect somewhere down the line that there would be a bid also for the multi-role fighter aircraft, which is down, we just put that thing is just gone as a report from the MOD. It's going to come up soon. It's going to be a very big deal. So that the thing of Buy America is going to come up. He said so in his talk with the Prime Minister. So I would look out for that if I were you.
Right. All right. Well, I'd like to thank you all very much for joining us. We're going to keep a close eye on this visit. The Prime Minister will be landing later on, early in the morning, IST, and then that important visit, meeting with President Trump and others. For the moment, we'll take a short break, but up after that, a report on where the Prime Minister was. He was in France. AI was the focus, but there was a lot more as well. We'll bring you up to date. That's coming up.